Oh yeah, good lightning. Getting back into production is weird. You got to kind of get into it a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm all right. Hey Siri, turn on Do Not Disturb. I'll just hope the thing will be off. Okay. Just gonna turn your mic. That'd be good.
Yeah. How we doing?
Yep.
Good boy?
Good to go. You can take the boy out of Bassett, but you can't take the Bassett out of the boy. My guest today, Colby Coash, is kind of like Sam. Only I'm from Valentine, Nebraska. Colby's just down the road in Bassett, Nebraska. Go to Rock County. County plates, 66 for me. But today on Cowboys Not Eggheads, I'm honored to welcome Colby Coash, former Nebraska State Senator, rural Nebraska kid, like I said, from Bassett, Nebraska, actor turned author.
Yeah, that's right.
Who has a book that came out, last year?
Been out just 1 year. Yep.
1 year. Running Naked, Surviving the Legacy of Family in Rural Nebraska, which lays bare the tensions of small town roots, family legacy, and the pursuit of purpose. Is that right?
That's all. Yeah, you got it right. That's
So I know Colby, and I did not know that you had this book. And obviously having this podcast and Cowboys Not Eggheads, which is basically kind of the story of my life with friends, is what I like to say. But it's interesting. Your book is kind of based on what this podcast. I mean, there's some parallels there. I think that this podcast for me has been a journey, Colby, of discovery. I joke that it's my therapy, but I don't think it's a joke. It is my therapy. And so obviously there's different ways to express. You know, you can go to therapy, or you could write a book, or you can have a podcast.
Yeah, I'm telling you, writing this book in a lot of ways was very therapeutic for me. I wrote it late nights, early mornings. I wrote it when I was in a good mood. I wrote when I was in a bad mood, and getting some of these things out was good for me. But they were things on my heart I wanted to put on paper. To be honest, though, I didn't know if I'd ever publish it. At one point, I thought, look, I'll do this just for myself. Then later on, I thought, well, you know what? Maybe I'll let my dad read it. He's kind of the hero of the story, so to speak. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll let my son read it because it's kind of a father-son.
How old's your son?
Narrative. My son is only 16.
Okay. Well, that would have been interesting, though, because it's kind of from that viewpoint almost. There's a lot of that.
He is the same age now that I was in a lot of these stories that I wrote about when I was growing up in Bassett.
So was it to take a little courage to share with your dad?
Yeah, it did. I was nervous about it because you talk to memoir writers, which is what this is, and you know it's from my perspective, and I knew it was my truth, but. You know, my dad was in the same scene that I was writing about. He might write a different story from the same scene. You know, his perspective was different. And I was worried about how not only he would see that, some of those stories that I wrote, but frankly, some of the people in the community where I grew up would see those stories because I
haven't read the book, listeners. He just gave me a copy, but I've read the synopsises of it. Does it name certain people, or
it does?
It does. So you go straight to the.
It does, of course. I mean, if I say my grandfather, everybody's gonna know.
Right. But I mean, like specific people within the town.
There are specific people. Some of them are gone.
Yeah, they all die. So.
But honestly, the town that I grew up in, not unlike Valentine, the town was its own character in my memoir.
Mm-hmm.
How the town collectively, at least in my 13-year-old viewpoint, treated me, how I responded to the town, how I responded to kind of this expectation that was laid on me as a young person in a small town, how I felt about that. The town really became its own character. And so I was kind of nervous about how that would be received because I didn't hold back. I mean, I wrote my truth from the perspective, but it was from the perspective of a 40-something-year-old guy now looking back on how he was raised, how the community impacted him. And so it was really a small town narrative that kind of drove me through. And but I did make the decision, obviously, to publish it. And I'm very happy to say I just won the Nebraska book.
Well, congratulations. That's awesome.
So for that category. So I'm excited that's actually very timely. A week from today, I'll be accepting.
So where just so listeners know, you can go to Amazon.com and get this book, right?
Yep, it's available on
Amazon. The book is called Running Naked, Surviving the Legacy of Family in Rural Nebraska.
That's right. So
great. Well, let's get into it. I mean, so you grew up in Bassett, Nebraska. How do you think that shaped your earliest identity?
Well, a lot of it did. What I learned early and what I wrote about in the book was people that I grew up around tended to do what their families did, right? So if you grew up in a farm family, you probably became a farmer. If you grew up in a ranching family, many times you became a rancher. Or you might marry somebody who did what you did. And so there was always this.
It reminds me of the Blackberry Smoke song, One Horse Town. I don't know if you've ever heard that one.
Yep, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was this kind of ingrained in you what you did. My family's roots, not unlike yours, go real deep in that community. They go so deep that sometimes people couldn't tell me from my dad or my dad from my grandfather. We were all just kind of the same family, same person. And so there was this, what I wrote about was this expectation that, you know, you're here, you're born here, you'll work here, you'll die here kind of mentality that didn't sit well with me as a young person.
But did anyone ever tell you that in your family? Did anyone say you're going to stay here and run the business?
No, not one person ever said that.
But there's a expectation that was implied.
Felt ancestral. And everybody I looked around, everybody I saw around my world all did that. So it wasn't like they had to say it. It's just kind of what happened. But my mother decided on a different path, and I wrote about that, where she kind of said, I'm out, and kind of abandoned my sister and I at some age. I was 13, she was 12, so right between like grade school and high school.
I've talked about that on this podcast, how that is probably the toughest time of your life when you're 12 or 13.
Oh, it's brutal because you're just fighting with everything. You're fighting with your own body. You're fighting with...
But don't know who the hell you are, let alone anybody else.
Yeah. So it was a real turning point, and there were a lot of funny moments. This was not a deep, dark unveiling necessarily.
But it's part of the story.
Part of the story, and so I just had this idea of where I wanted to be, and I had this ancestral kind of pull on the other side. But as I don't want to give away any Easter eggs on eggheads here, but you know, at the end of the day, you know, it did kind of come full circle, and I kind of understood the value that small town instilled in me. So, you know, it's hard work, right? Hard work has probably sustained me more than anything, maybe to my detriment in some cases. That's something that I got from that town, right? Was a work ethic.
Yes.
And so I wrote about that, and that was important to me. The importance of fatherhood was important to me because it's kind of all I was left with at one point in my growing up, and just kind of this village raising a child and finding your village. And I really did. I didn't seem like it at the time, but I had some real angels in my life growing up there that kind of kept me from going off the deep end.
Who were they?
So one of them her name was Karen. And Karen was the owner of the local drive-in. Drive-in is kind of like a ice cream shop, we call it, right? So at one point you'd pull up and car hops would come out, you know, and serve you ice cream. But it was just kind of the local cafe.
Kind of from listeners have ever seen American Graffiti. That's kind
exactly.
The Valentine for years had the Frosty Freeze, and it's gone now.
This would be the King Cone.
Yeah,
you had the Frosty Freeze. I had the King Cone as a cone of ice cream. And even though I wasn't supposed to, I was working there quite a bit as like a 14, 15-year-old washing dishes. And, you know, I kind of found out later that Karen had put me in a position to do that because I didn't have anybody that was really paying attention to what I was doing. She was keeping me out of trouble, frankly, is what she was doing. And she stepped in kind of this mother role when I didn't have one. You know, she kind of vetted girlfriends that I wanted. She, you know, when I needed to sign up for classes as a freshman, I took her instead of, because I didn't have a parent that could go.
Right.
So, you know, she was really kind of an angel for me. And and so she was kind of one of those bright spots when I had lost so many other people in my family that kind of abandoned me as a kid. She was kind of stable figure there. And she did that because she loved me. She loved she just loved me. And so she was the one I wrote extensively about in the book. And as I moved through my life, other people kind of stepped up. But you wouldn't have got that growing up maybe in an urban area. That was something very unique to small town Nebraska.
For sure.
Small town USA.
For sure. Folks look after their own. The subtitle of the book mentions surviving the legacy. What were you surviving?
Well, I did everything I could to kind of run, and that's where the title Running Naked comes from. I did everything I could to run from the legacy. And when I talk about legacy, it's what is kind of laid out before you, right? So my family was in agriculture, a business that was started by my grandfather, was being passed down. And I kind of looked at this like, is this yours to go and run from? But that business killed, not literally, but killed my grandfather. And the story that I wrote about in the book was in the mid 80s, you were there, farm crisis happens in Nebraska.
It was monumental to a lot of people.
It was monumental. So to kind of set the stage, right? So we have the ag economy, which is Nebraska's all in on, and interest rates are high. Debt is high with all the producers. They borrowed a lot of money. And then you have commodity prices, whether it's corn or beef, go the other direction. And it was, when I was growing up in the 80s, it was not uncommon for a family that I maybe had a classmate with, like a kid in my class would just disappear. Be in school on Friday, not be there on Monday because the bank had foreclosed on their farm.
Right.
So they would just disappear, right? And they'd go live with a relative somewhere. So the mid 80s was a time of real turmoil in small town Nebraska, but I'm 10. All I see is the stress that's on my family, on my dad. I could see the stress that was putting on my parents' marriage with this farm crisis. So the backdrop of my early years is this real farm agriculture crisis, right, that you hear about. But I wrote about it through the eyes of a 10-year-old. And through a 10-year-old's eyes, it was, this is stressing my parents out.
Yeah.
Right. And they did their best to protect me. But my grandfather, who had started a fertilizer business, which is ironic, he's in his mid-50s. He'd run it for over 20 years. It finally caught up to his health, and he had an aneurysm, and he died.
Yeah.
And so I'm 10. My dad's 30, 31. My dad's not much. And he was a young dad. My dad takes over a business that all of a sudden, the backdrop is hundreds of his customers couldn't pay their bills.
Yeah.
Which means he couldn't pay his employees.
Yes.
Which means he couldn't buy more product. Like, it was chaos. And
economic ripple effect.
Everybody was under, right? The farmers couldn't pay.
It's upside down.
They couldn't pay their fertilizer bill. They couldn't pay their taxes, you name it. And so my dad was like left with this mountain of debt, mountain of problems, a business that was trying its best to do right by the people they employed and the people, their customers. And I watched how it affected my dad. And I said, I don't know if this is my path. So when I wrote the word surviving, I was like, I don't know if I can survive this next iteration. So I started to think differently and took it.
And the thing that's different in a small town that some of my listeners may not realize is that your customers are your neighbors. Mm-hmm. They're your friends. You see them all the time. Your kids go to high school together. You see them at ball games. Mm-hmm. It's a very close-knit community. And so it's hard enough as it is. But when you add that factor, the advantage of living in a small town are that you have the Karens who took you up, and the disadvantage of a small town is everybody's in everybody's business, and when something like that happens, it affects everybody, and it is extremely stressing. It's funny. I remember. I'll get off tangent here a little bit. I was in high school at that time, and I actually went to an egghead school. I went to Mount Michael, so I didn't go to Valentine High, and so I was away. But I knew what was going on, and I remember there were friends of mine in the '70s. I always wondered, and it's just an economic lesson, really, but. Like, hey, how come so-and-so has 6 pickups? How come so-and-so has 4 snowmobiles? How come so-and-so has, 5 motorcycles? Because the Fishers, we had 1 pickup. It was unheard of back then to have 1 pickup on a ranch. We had 1 pickup. Later we didn't have any snowmobiles. We had 1 motorcycle, 2 couple motorcycles. And so people were borrowing, and it was just a lesson to me in economics of maybe, particularly agriculture, you've got to, like beef prices right now are way too high. Well, wait a minute. Are they? They've been pretty, it's been a break-even business in the ranching business for a long time, just busting your butt to break even. And so agriculture is all about saving and being thrifty and not getting too high or not getting too low. It's about riding the wave. But if you get out of, it's like any business. If you get out of whack or out of sync, it will sink you literally.
Yeah, and it's a domino effect, right?
Yes.
The farm can't pay the bills, the vendors can't pay their employees, the employees quit, they can't. I mean, it became a vicious cycle.
I don't know in Bassett, I don't know what the Main Street looks like. I don't know, was there ever like 5 businesses on Main Street or something? But
there was.
Five became 2.
Yeah, and one of them was my other grandfather's. If you look at my...
Oh, you owned a bar?
My grandfather had the Ben Franklin store.
Ah,
you remember those, right? So he
sure.
he had one of the last Ben Franklins in the state.
For one to be in Bassett, that's a big deal. And the layout for listeners again, the population of Bassett is what? It's less than Valentine.
It is today and this is on the back of my book. So on the back, I have a picture of me or a picture of the sign. So in Nebraska, they always put the name of the town and the population. When I was a kid, it was 1,010, 1010. And relatively speaking, I come from a smaller family, right? I had parents, a sister, parents on both sides were from Bassett, and 2 aunts. So I counted my family as 10. So I always thought, wow, that's really interesting. If my family up and left, they'd be an even 1,000. But growing up, it was 1,000. And when I went back for my, 10-year high school reunion, it was 800 something. When I went back for my 20 years reunion, it was 600 something. We're lucky to be north of 500 now.
Yeah, half what it was. Half. I mean, so we're talking. So again, it's a small place.
It is a small community, and everybody knows in your business.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. How did you negotiate the pull between loyalty, which is a cowboy code, which I'm sure you felt? I mean, obviously, how did you negotiate the pull between loyalty and the desire to leave?
Yeah, it was hard. So again, everybody around me all stayed. Most people did. Even my classmates, many of them that would go to college, they'd come back, right? Run the family business, the farm, whatever it was. I thought I would be the most opposite thing I could think of from like agriculture, right? So I thought I'm gonna go into performance, acting. I'm gonna be on stage, be in front of the camera, whatever it was. I thought that would be the way for me to differentiate myself. And I knew that, if that's the career vocation you choose, you're not gonna do it in a small town, Nebraska. There's no jobs for that. But then I had this pull from kind of this, I always call it this ancestral pull, but it really did feel like that, right? Like you are expected to do what your family and
because a lot of it is because your family did work so hard. And because I mean, it was the loyalty is to uphold your name.
Yep. It was there's pride in that. To my dad's credit, he never once pushed me in a direction to come back, to take over.
My parents didn't either. He
thought I should plow my own road. And that was very freeing for me. Now, it was still made me nervous, so I did a lot of things to make sure that I wasn't a good candidate to come back anyway. And I wrote about these in the book. I ran from the law. I mean, I got a little legal trouble. I did something which I would never let my son today do. I only went to 3 years of high school. I didn't drop out. I decided I would do the last year of my high school and the first year of my college career at the same time. And so I moved out. I just left at 17. And that was something that my dad probably wished I wouldn't have done. In hindsight, it probably wasn't a really smart idea. But he kind of knew based on other things that I had done that maybe he should let me go. And he did. And he was always there to catch me when I fell. He was there when I needed him. But he made it easy. And I didn't make it easy. I probably wasn't the most lovable kid at some points because I had been hardened by some things that my mom.
Your mom left at 12.
She left. She not only left, she went to a different country. Went to Mexico. To California, then into Mexico. Like she just went to a different country. And that was, that's tough. That was tough for me.
Big time.
That was tough. So my dad, in a lot of ways, he's the hero of my story because of that. But he never pushed me to do that. So I made my peace with that, and the business it's still in business, but it's just doesn't have the Coash name anymore. And everybody's okay with that. You know, my dad's retired. I'm not part of the business anymore, or never was, but it's still part of the community and wouldn't be there but for my family. So there's still some pride.
Yeah. Well, my story is sort of similar in that, or not sort of similar, but I mean, apparently when I was 12, I don't remember this conversation, but I apparently told my mother, I don't want to be a rancher. And to my parents' credit, they could have taken me to Valentine High. My brother and sister graduated from there, but they just didn't think I was going to benefit from shop class, you know? Actually, I probably would have benefited from shop class because I was never good at that part of it. And so they kind of scouted around for some options for me. If I was going to, go to college, they wanted me to be well prepared. So we had some friends in Cherry County that had their kids went to Mount Michael. So I'm a Presbyterian kid sent off to a Catholic boarding school that's a college prep school. And so I basically left the house when I was 14, not 17. I was making, when you were 17, all those transitions that you had, I was 14, away from the ranch, yeah, it's just really interesting.
Let me tell you what my dad did that I wrote about in the book that to this day readers will say, I cannot believe he did this. When I was 13, again, he was a single dad at this point, and I was contacted by a woman that had done some camps in Ainsworth and like for kids in the area, and I'd done that as a middle schooler. She said, I'm taking some people on a trip to Africa. And I had done some trips with her to Europe, just like a week trip, for kids. And my dad was happy to pay whatever and let me go experience travel.
What?
It was like a school group though, right? It was very chaperoned. There wasn't anything terribly normal about that. And it was only 7-10 days. Well, I had gotten a knack for travel, and I felt like, I guess I was unafraid. And that was something that maybe distinguished myself. I wasn't afraid to go to a different country. I wasn't afraid to try new things. Well, she contacted me and says, I think you'd be good to help me out on a different trip that I'm taking. So would you like to go to Africa? I went to Africa for a month with no cell phone. I mean, this is pre-cell phones, right? I went there for a month. It was a safari-like trip. We went to 5 countries, sketchy places, saw some really unique things in Eastern Africa with a group of people that I was like chaperoning, I was the helper. So and what was ironic about this, as I look back on it, was I didn't ask my dad's permission. I just said, I have this opportunity. I'm going to Africa for the month of July. I need from you, Dad, is a ride to the airport. And he didn't bat an eye. And he took me in the airport. He said goodbye to me, and I was gone for a month, and he didn't know where I was.
How old were you? 13? I
was 13. This was shortly after my mother had left, and this opportunity presented itself, and I went to 5 countries, climbed mountains, saw mountain gorilla. I mean, I wrote about all this in the book.
Perspective.
And it gave me a perspective, but I cannot that's the thing people say, you got to be kidding me. Your dad let you do this? And I'm like, I didn't give him a whole lot of choice. I was kind of feral.
Yeah.
And so I did that. So, although it wasn't the same as what you did, kind of moving away, it was
no, it's a
big
deal.
deal.
Big
It was a big deal.
Most 13-year-old nowadays, it doesn't happen.
I came back a different kid.
Yeah.
I came back
sure
a
you
very
did.
different
You
kid.
grew up in a month. I mean.
And then I came back and I go to my freshman year in high school. I just spent a month independent in Africa. And I'm looking around and going, I had less in common with my peers. Because I had seen things and I had experienced things that they hadn't. And it wasn't their fault.
You were searching for more. You wanted some more. Because it could have gone 2 ways. Could have been like, hey, I got perspective. You're going to get perspective anyway you look at it. But you got perspective. But now my perspective is I'm grateful that I'm able to live in this really small town and have everybody, taking care of me or whatever. Or what happened with you is it gave her perspective and you leave me wanting more.
Yeah.
There's more than Bassett.
There's
and
more.
You wanted to know, a lot of people in rural Nebraska, like my father-in-law, love him to death. He's 75 years old, and I don't think he's ever been to any other state besides Iowa. And he doesn't have any desire whatsoever to go anywhere. And for me, that's hard to relate to, and I know people in Cherry County that my great grandmother who's in that picture right there holding me, that was the first time she'd ever left Garden County, Nebraska, to see her great-grandchild.
It's crazy.
You know, it's just, to me, that's like, can you imagine being in Rock County and never leaving? But there are people in Rock County who have never left.
There are.
And there's not a damn thing wrong with it, but it's just something that I don't relate to. You didn't relate to. You wanted more. Was it more?
I mean, I saw people like that all around me. They were my dad's employees, my teachers, my friends' parents. They were just kind of ingrained. And to my father's credit, he was willing to let me see other things. He needs to write a book from his perspective. All I know is from my perspective, had he not been supportive of those things. But at the same time, I'm a parent now. If my son came to me and says, I just need to, at 13, and said, I need to ride to the airport and I'll see you in a month. First of all, his mom would...
I'll take a hike.
Exactly. I mean, I know it's we're talking, I think it was 89 versus today.
It's Gen X, man. We were latchkey kids.
We were, and that's going to be my next book, because I swear to God, the stuff that we...
Do you identify with generation?
I do. Get through.
Yeah, proud of it, actually, yeah. But now, yeah, it's just, it wouldn't, and frankly, I don't think your kid would ever do that to you, right?
I don't think so. I mean,
it's a different time. Maybe because of technology,
I feel better about it. Yeah,
the world's more open to it.
I could get on my phone and figure out exactly where he is in the world. But it was
that's interesting.
Unique time. But that was I ran as far as I could, and I got all the way to Eastern Africa.
And learned some more. It's super, super interesting. So, did you take a trip to California to see your mom after she left?
I did.
And how old were you?
So this was a little bit later. She'd been there a couple of years, and the one I wrote, I didn't really see her again until I was in college. So
wow,
she kind of disappeared through high school. I mean, I knew where she was. We'd communicated.
You did talk to her once in a while?
A little bit.
Merry Christmas.
So her mother still lived in Bassett, right? So
okay.
Still had a grandmother.
So
that was kind of
a connection.
That was still that connection. But at some point in my college...
So she was from Bassett then?
My mother was born and raised there.
Wow.
Yeah. And she had a real... I wrote about this. I thought maybe that's where I get this itch from. Like,
yeah.
She just never felt like she fit in there.
Yeah.
She just... Particularly at that time, she had interests that were just very different than any of my other friends' moms. My mom was always the weird one, because she had fingernails and, you know what I mean?
She didn't chew tobacco.
No, she didn't chew tobacco, but she smoked, she couldn't even smoke a regular cigarette. My mother smoked these little bitty, they looked like straws. You know what I mean? They was kind of popular back then. She thought it made her look different, and it did. So I did get to see my mother a few times, when I got older, and, a little more perspective.
Where did she live? Where did she live in California?
Well, she lived, when she initially moved there, she lived in San Diego, like a suburb of San Diego, La Jolla. So it was a nice part of town. And then at some point, she moved south of the border into the Baja Peninsula, and on the beach, and lived there.
Cabo San Lucas.
South of Cabo. Well, Cabo is so Tijuana is like across the border.
Yep.
Cabo's like at the tip.
Yeah.
She was halfway in between.
Gotcha.
Ensenada was the city town she lived in, and so I was able to visit her once or twice.
So how did that go? If you don't mind me asking, I mean that would be tough. You go from 13 to 19 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And you're a completely different person at that point. How did it? Was it awkward? Was it natural? How did it go?
She was still trying to be my mother. What I learned, again, as a 40-something-year-old looking back, is she had her own demons. She was fighting her own problems. And she didn't see, from her point of view, she didn't see the problem with what she did. She thought she would say things like, well, you were grown up enough. You can handle this. So you turned out okay. Like no harm, no foul. I wasn't there, but by the way, you could have come live with me. I mean, that was an offer that was on the table. You want to move to Southern California. And as much as I wanted out of Bassett, Nebraska, I frankly, as a 13-year-old kid, was scared to move to California. Yeah. Even though I wasn't scared to go to Africa for a month, I was scared to kind of relocate. I had a real connection to my friends and what I was into, and I thought, I don't want to start over. And so I said, well, I'm just going to stay here. And eventually, like I said, that didn't last very long because I said, I'm not going to do all 4 years of high school. I'm gone. So, but it was hard. We just didn't, I was communicating with a woman I was very close to, obviously, who just didn't see me the same.
Yeah.
And with hindsight being 2020, what I can say is she was ill. She just wasn't. And I have to say that out loud because well people don't abandon their children.
Right.
People who are firing on all cylinders or thinking clearly don't uproot and leave their preteen kids and say, I hope life turns out well for you. I'll be here if you want to call me. Like, that's not something a well person does. So I've had to make some peace with it.
Have you forgiven her?
I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that would be peace.
Yeah. I did it for me.
Yeah. 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 That's the interesting part of your background. I never knew about that. Guess it's not stuff you talk about in a political campaign.
That's right.
Well,
people have always asked me, oh, where's your mom? And you know, my dad remarried, and the woman he married was one of those other angels in my life. You know what I mean? Like, when I wasn't a lovable kid, I was kind of pushing people away. And so, you know, and maybe it's not fair to my mother, but I'm happy to let my stepmother play that role. And, you know, and so when the people that knew me growing up in the book, they know different because they know everybody.
Yeah. So what do you hope small town readers take away about staying or leaving?
Yeah. You know, I hope they take away what I took away from the experience of writing the book and kind of looking back, which is, and it's cliche, and it's an 80s, I go back, it's an 80s metal song, but you don't know what you got till it's.
That's right.
And as cliche as that is, I hope readers will look at their own circumstances. I mean, you don't have to grow up in a small town to recognize what you had when you were younger that you might look at differently. So I hope readers will take away that. You know, I've asked the reader to go on this journey with me of all growing up in small town Nebraska. And if you haven't grown up in small town Nebraska or anywhere, you'll know what it's like after you read my book. And that's what I'm really proud of.
Yeah.
Like, people, this isn't a book just for people who grew up in a small town. They know what it's like. But if you didn't grow up in a small town, you're gonna see it through somebody who lived it as they're living it. And so that's kind of the fun part for me. I hope readers get out. There's a lot of fun stories in there about what us Gen Xers did and how feral.
Keg parties and freaking, you know,
running from the cops.
An Alpine stereo and a freaking Chevrolet Citation, and you know what I mean, power boosters, and I mean, you know, equalizer in your stereo, and that's why I continue to have it ring in my right ear to this day.
All of that, as you know, the most important thing, growing up in small towns, what you drove and what you were listening to.
Yes, sir, what you were listening to. So let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah, sure.
Because how did like, so you listen to a lot of the stuff that I do.
I do.
Like, you know, like I'm trying to think of a band that I brought to Valentine, Nebraska. I think Rat and Dawkins. Sure. And because I was you know, I was going to school in Omaha, so I'd bring home. So Whitesnake might have been a band that I brought. And I always was fascinated, like, how in the heck does this music get to like these small towns? Because I think MTV is probably the answer.
A lot of it.
MTV was probably a lot of the answer. But how were you introduced to these bands?
Oh my God!
When you were a kid, I
am young, but I'm also the oldest in my family. I'm the firstborn, so I didn't have older siblings, right? But I had really good friends who all had older brothers. And it was there's these older brothers of my friends who were introducing us to, and one of them, like, I just idolized this guy because he had the long hair and the earrings and
Bon Jovi.
He looked like Bon Jovi, and for me, he was, you know, Stephen Piercy, or he.
You're talking about a guy in your town.
Yeah, this guy in my town was a guy that he was
like Mike Damone.
He lived up the street from me. He worked for a time for my dad. And my dad would assign me, his name was Troy. And he'd say, you're going to ride with Troy while he makes deliveries and sprays lawns and does these things. And he had a tape deck. he brought this
boombox.
No, he brought a briefcase
Full of tapes.
full of tapes, and I would sit in the back and I would just look at every tape.
And you read like the album liners too.
I would read the names of the songs.
You probably knew the engineers, or
oh my God, I was obsessed with it. And then I got a BMG. Was it BMG tape subscription? Wow. Remember when you could, and then your first one you could get 10 for a penny. Penny a piece. And so I just
went to town.
I just went to town, and every month I'd get one or two, and it just became part of who I was and how I absorbed the world. And then I would start getting to go to Omaha to go to concerts. We can talk about that forever. Like my very first concert, and my dad grew up in the 60s, and he's an old hippie, and he understood the power of like generational music, although he was more into his than of course mine. But my very first concert was, he took me to see Cinderella, Winger, and the Bullet Boys. Triple
91.
That was my first.
1991?
I think so.
Yeah.
It's my first concert. And then,
where was that? Omaha?
Actually, it was in Rapid City.
After this podcast, I'm going to tell you a story about that particular concert and my ex-girlfriend. I can't tell about it on the air.
That was my first concert. And that just kind of, and then between that concert, tapes, this guy, Troy, who was just, I idolized him because he looked like a rocker.
Yeah,
and he had all the girls liked him. And it was because of him I got my ear pierced and grew my hair out.
Oh my God.
I mean, I was.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow.
I wrote about this book. It was actually my mother who pierced it because she was a.
Oh my God. Yeah. How old were you?
When I got my ear pierced?
No, yeah.
6th grade.
Wow. You were a freak, dude. In a small town like that, people were talking about you.
My mother did it because she wanted me to stand out.
Yeah. Same reason she smokes the Capris, right?
Exactly.
Wow. Yeah, I got my ear pierced once too. I don't think I've ever told this story on the podcast. Was at a party and had a Super C cup full of beer, and my friend Lisa, who I'm still very dear friends with, she's in Valentine. She had a diamond stud, and my friend Todd Davenport, I won't tell you his. What the hell? He will never listen to this. His nickname was Fung, but Fung. I'm just, obviously not in a sober state of mind. And he dipped this, I'm like, I want to get my ear pierced. So he dips this diamond stud into the Super C bottle, cup of beer, because that would sterilize it. That would sterilize it. And just jammed it right in my freaking ear. And so my ear was pierced, just like that, right? 3 days later, my ear like swells up to, like a ping pong size. So I go to the med center and the doctor digs it out of there and he's like, don't ever do this again. Anyway, somehow years later my dad found out about that. My mom knew, but Dad didn't till later. Yeah, his comment was like, I thought you were smarter than that, which is like my dad's death knell. That's all he had to say. He's like, you like, that's all he had to say. I thought you were smarter than that.
Well, so
you started early.
My mother did it because
you actually got it done the right way. You didn't have to have a drunk buddy put it in a freaking cup of beer.
But my dad, he grew up in the 60s. He went to Woodstock. He understood that culture, and he wanted me to. I mean, he was kind of a rebel at his time, but that just started me on this path of, to this day, it's just kind of my jam.
Yeah.
I've passed it on to my son to an extent,
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, as long as your son knows who George Lynch is, I'm happy.
He knows who Dokken is for sure.
That's good. Okay. Those guys are now in their 70s, but I digress because I know how old I am. That's great. How did so you later became a state senator, and this show is not really about politics, but I mean we talk about some aspects of politics. But how did rural Nebraska shape your politics?
Well, this is a story that's going to hit home for you, I think. I mentioned Karen earlier, and I'm working in the King Kong, and I'm 13, 14. Way younger than you probably could get hired today, because I'm in there washing dishes. I'm working after schools and weekends.
Everybody did in small towns, right?
So I remember one day, she came to me. She says, "Hey, Colby, I'm gonna have to cut your hours." I said, really? That did not sit well with me because I was a hard worker and the alternative was working at the fertilizer plant, saving for a car, all that. And I said, why? And she said, well, the legislature down in Lincoln's thinking about, or is going to pass this bill. It's going to limit the amount of hours a kid can work, depending on their age and how late they can work and total hours and all that. And I was like, well, that is not okay. I was pretty upset about it. So I go home and I tell my dad this story. I said, Karen says she's going to cut my hours.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm trying to save for this car. And what I was hoping my dad would say is, well, I'll kick in the money. He didn't say that. He says, well, we better call your senator. And he goes to the wall, pokes in and some.
Let me tell you, it was it the camp? Who was it? Who was your state senator?
In Bassett, it was Howard Lamb.
Oh, Howard Lamb, yeah, sure. 43rd District.
43rd District.
Yes.
Calls Howard Lamb.
Been there since Noah built the Ark.
Long time representative. Of course, my dad knew him because he's in business.
Yeah.
And I tell Howard the story. And he says, well, I hadn't heard about that, but let me check into it. Get off the phone. I didn't know what a state senator was. I was pretty green. And about a week later, I get a little letter from letterhead of the state senator, Howard Lamb. And he says, I looked into it and I says, I agree with you. You ought to be able to work as much as you want. I'm going to do what I can to keep this from happening. Took that into my boss. And I said, he says he's going to take care of it. You don't have to cut my hours. And at the end of the day,
Wow.
The bill never passed. I felt like I had something to do with it. I really probably didn't. But what it showed me, what my dad role modeled for me in that very small instance was, you can have an impact if you are proactive about it.
Yeah.
And he didn't do anything other than talk a little business with the senator and then hand me the phone as a 12-year-old. And I talked to the senator and I told him the story. And I felt like it, I never forgot that, of course.
No.
And I never
Empowered.
I felt empowered about that. And, my life took some swerves, and I'm living in Lincoln and I start to see things happening at that level of government. I thought I could have some influence over, and I was kind of unafraid to do that. And had my dad not planted that seed, I don't know if that would have been the path I would have taken. And I don't think he meant for me to run for state.
But it's one of those little funny moments in life.
But it was a funny moment in life, and it was as it turned out, it was one of those forks in the road that really turned me into, got me into the opportunity to do what I did for 8 years, which was pretty cool.
What leadership lessons carry over from your upbringing? Leadership in the legislature or business or whatever.
It's that work ethic. There's just no substitute for grinding it out. That has, my wife will tell you, I'm just stubborn in that way. But that was I was working in my father's fertilizer plant as a really young kid. And that instilled in me the notion that if something's going to happen, it's going to be by your own effort. And that's how we all work. And I wasn't unique. All my friends worked hard. Everybody in that grew up in a small town, and we all worked. Whether it's branding cattle, sweeping fertilizer bins, washing dishes.
Well, your identity, I'm talking about that, and a friend of mine, J.D. Krause, is from Valentine, Nebraska. He talked about that your identity is your work ethic. You're defined by, he's a hard worker. She's a boy. That guy's the hardest worker in town or whatever. That's kind of your identity. Yeah. And he has actually unique take on that there's more to life than just hard work, and it's about servant. He's a deep Christian guy, but he just has a really deep take on that. It's more than that.
I agree.
It's really interesting. Check out. It's called Born in Cherry County.
I'm gonna do that because the opposite is also true, right? I remember people over the years working for my dad, and they got labeled lazy.
You don't want that reputation.
That is a scarlet letter.
And here's the deal: you could wear that earring in town because you were a hard worker. They'd see past that because that would.
They saw
that.
effort.
They saw effort. But if you didn't, and then you had got the earring, and it's even bigger death knell, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
It does go back to that hard work thing. I'm with you. I fancy myself as my entire career. I was able to retire early because of that. I think it is what it is. It is what it is. But the older you get, the different reflections you have on that, obviously. What was the hardest chapter of the book for you to write?
I'll give something away here. So we talked about my mother a little bit. So halfway through the book, she dies. And go into how you're gonna have to read the book for that.
Yeah.
But when she died,
How old were you?
I was just out of college, 20.
Okay.
20
This has been a number of years then.
Yeah, so it's been a while. But what made it difficult was to write was what I wrote about was the responsibility my dad had to tell me that my mother had died. And there's a whole story behind that. But what made it difficult was he was the same age that I was when I was writing the book, telling his son that my son was. So I couldn't help but almost like I wrote about from the perspective of the kid whose mom died, okay. But then I was thinking about the burden of a father telling their son.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm putting myself into this role of I am a father, I do have a son, and how would I handle it? So that was just like really heavy for me, you know.
Yeah.
And so that was probably the toughest to write about because I wanted to honor
very
the
emotional.
story. And it's got some funny endings too. I certainly
Can't wait to read the book.
I can't wait for you to read it because there's a lot of this is not a doom and gloom book. This is a story
No. It's small
of
town,
redemption and small town hijinks and all that. But it's the father-son stuff that was probably the most challenging to write. But particularly that scene was hard because I didn't want to get it wrong.
Yeah. So what would you tell your 18-year-old self?
Slow down. Honestly, I was in such a hurry. I was in such a rush.
Were you running away from Bassett, or were you running?
I was running away. And I did things that I regret. And I wrote about this. I didn't go to senior prom.
Yeah.
Big deal,
Well,
right?
you didn't. You choose to skip your
Because I skipped
senior
it.
year.
Because I skipped it,
Yeah.
right? But I didn't go to the junior prom either. And I would tell my 18-year-old self, you know what? Go to prom. You won't regret that. Because today I do. And it's not like it was like a sea change in my life because I chose not to go to prom. But I would tell my 18-year-old self, slow the F down, go to prom. Enjoy what you have. Because in the moment, I couldn't see it. Reflecting back, I can see
gratitude is something that the older you get, the more you fall that way or understand it.
So what I would tell my 18-year-old self is go to the parties, kiss the girls, do all that, but recognize how special that time in your life is. You know, with the pressures of adulthood, I'd do anything to go back and relive some of those days. They're the best days of my life.
Yeah. And
I wrote about those things like driving around, drinking beers. Just we had goals of kissing girls, like that was life. Although I was oriented towards other things, those were really the best times. And I would tell my 18-year-old self, you don't know how good you got it, man, because someday you're going to be an adult, and you're going to have responsibilities and jobs and be a parent yourself. And you're going to wish you had this kind of freedom, Yeah. So that's what I do.
Yeah. Yeah. Good advice. Good advice. What do you define family legacy today as?
Wow. So I can only define it for what was modeled for me and what I try to model for my own family. And I defined it as impact that you can have in whatever role that you are. Like I had impact as a role as a senator, but frankly, the biggest impact I have right now is the role as a father. And so the legacy is kind of be where your feet are. This is what I've tried to live by.
Interesting.
So if I'm be where your feet are, and that means just you're being a dad.
My dad gave that advice once to somebody.
Yeah, and I learned that lesson probably later in life, and I've tried to reorientate myself to it. But the legacy that I'm leaving is the one I leave as a father, maybe as a former politician, maybe it's the work I'm doing now. I'm hoping this book is a legacy that I can leave, and that was a big part of it. And all authors are egomaniacs, right? It's like, oh, I wrote about something really important, So I'm trying to be humble about it, but I think if I can put a light on small town America, a light on father-son relationships, I'm hoping that's a legacy that outlives me as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was easy, everybody do it.
That's right.
Good for you.
Thanks,
Congratulations Tim. On the book. Again, if listeners want to check out the book, you just go to Amazon.
Running Naked, Colby Coash. It'll show up there.
And you can, the running naked part is a literal story. We won't get into it.
There is a little story there. There are photos in the book, but it's nothing R-rated, so you don't have to worry about
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Sam.
Listeners, the man drove all the way from Lincoln, Nebraska to be in our studio today, and I really appreciate
it. Happy to be here. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
it. Betcha. Awesome. That was awesome.
Well, when you get it all polished up, send it to me so I can spread.
I will.